Good morning, good afternoon, good day, ladies and gentlemen, Catholics, Orthodox, Christians, all who seek the truth, as I used to always start my old videos, which are still fantastic videos, by the way. Today, there is an article which I came across on a website called thetorah.com, or as certain rabbis like to pronounce it, thetorah.com. So on thetorah.com, there's an article. Let's go a bit bigger here. So it's coming from Jewish scholars. And the question is, did the Jews crucify Jesus? This is the question of the article. And so the article was written by a professor called Tamás Visi, and he's I believe from Hungary, if I'm not, no, Czech Republic. So anyways, you can read about him and whatever. But this is his article. And so the article is quite important in a sense, well, because as you would know, the vast majority of, what we would call Jews would say, well, no, it was the Romans who killed Jesus. Well, technically true. But before we get into this, but the question is, how did he get to be executed? Do you think the Romans could care less about who the Messiah was, the Mashiach was? They couldn't care less. Anyways, but I'm going to go through the whole article. And basically, the professor on thetorah.com himself basically says, yes, the Talmud, especially the Babylonian Talmud, actually, though, it's because the Babylonian Talmud is the big one, and the Jerusalem Talmud is a bit much smaller than the Babylonian one. And basically, all Rabbinic Judaism, which we call Judaism, especially the Orthodox or the ultra-Orthodox, their whole religion is based on the Oral Torah, And the Oral Torah is mainly comes from the Talmud and from the sages. So it is the Oral Torah of the sages far surpasses in authority anything written in the 5 books of Moses. Because to understand the books of Moses, you must go back to the Oral Torah of the sages, as explained in the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Tosefta, and so forth. And this is the basis of the religion. Of course, if you read the Old Testament, you know the basis of Judaism. Well, we call it Judaism, but it's really the Israelite religion, the religion of Abraham, who came from Iraq, from Canaan, not Canaan, but where the Chaldeans are, which is Iraq. And the basis of the religion is sacrifice, priesthood. Before they had the temple, the head of the family offered the sacrifice to God, to the true God. And the head of the family, the man, would be the priest of the family. And then came Moses, and he established the temple sacrifices, and again he appointed men. So the whole religion is based upon, because whatever sins you committed, go do this, offer this sacrifice, and I'll give it to the priest to offer the sacrifice, or visit. So the whole religion is based on the temple and the temple sacrifice, the priesthood, and which forms it, covenant, priesthood, temple, the whole thing. Of course, when the temple was destroyed, the third temple, not the second temple, the third temple of Herod was destroyed. The whole basis of the Israelite, the Hebrew religion has been demolished. You cannot offer sacrifice. You cannot follow the commandments in the books of Moses, the 5 books, the first 5 books of the Torah, or the real Torah, the 5 books of the Old Testament, the first 5 books. You cannot follow them. So how do you follow Judaism? You create a brand new religion based on the sages, the wisdom of the sages and the tradition of the fathers. And so this is how, so for them, the Torah is the most the Talmud is the most sacred of sacred things, because it is passes on, which I understand, passes on the wisdom of the sages, who kept the faith of their fathers. So in the Talmud of Babylonia, the Babylonian Talmud, which is the main one, the author of this article, this professor on the Torah.com, plainly says, yes, the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, says that the Jews themselves took credit for the crucifixion of Jesus the Nazarene. And, but his excuse is, they were deceived. They believed the stories of the Christians. They believed some of the writings that influenced them, because they didn't really know better, basically. Because he said, the Jerusalem Talmud didn't say anything about it, so how come the Babylonian Talmud says? But if this professor would say that to any of the Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox rabbis, he would be condemned as a heretic, as an insulter of the sages, because the sages took credit. And one of them, I reviewed this book a while back. I read the whole thing, Jesus in the Talmud, by Professor Peter Schaefer. And I still get a lot of comments on it. It's unbelievable. But which is because it's an excellent book. And he's actually a professor of Talmudic studies, all the ancient manuscripts. And he is actually quoted in this article too, in a footnote. In this book, Jesus in Talmud, why was Jesus, basically, in summary, as I recall, I have to rewatch my own video to remember exactly. But Jesus was accused of, first of all, Mary is a harlot. The father of Jesus is a Roman soldier. And Jesus, the Nazarene, is an idolater, a magician. And it actually, in the Talmud, talks about the followers of Jesus actually healing people. Even Jews, unbelievers, would call Christians to heal their sick people by invoking the name of Jesus, which we see in the Old and New Testament. In the name of Jesus, they cure the sick, raise the dead even. But of course, they condemn it because Jesus is a magician, so you can't actually even do that. But Jesus is in the Talmud, and there is no question about it. I get these comments saying, well, it's Yeshua. Yeshua is not Jesus. Well, okay, whatever. It's like saying John in English is not Yohanna in Arabic. It's the same name. It's the same person. You're just using the different words for it. But so we're going to go through the article, and we're going to go through his excuses, like what he will quote from the New Testament and how he will try to understand it. Anyways, so we're going to do that. But before we get started, just because, first of all, we have to understand that, like Jesus himself said, he himself, not anybody else, he himself said that, you think that I cannot ask my Father and he will give me presently more than 12 legions of angels, when the priest sent these soldiers to arrest Jesus. He tells Peter, don't you think I can ask God to send me 12 legions of angels? But I'm allowing this to happen so Jesus' will, positive will, is to allow all of this to happen, that the scriptures might be fulfilled, that it must be done. So we cannot blame. So Jesus knew he had the power. And again, in John, he says, I lay down my life. So himself, Jesus Christ himself, he says, I lay down my life, that I may take it up again. No man taketh it away from me. So no Jews, no Romans, no barbarians, nobody takes it away from me. No man taketh it away from me, but I lay it down of myself. That's what makes him the priest, offering himself as sacrifice to the Father. And I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. So this is what I wanted to emphasize first. And as well, from if you read the New Testament, you'd see that how St. Paul was a great adversary. He would go to the what we might call Jews. I mean, and I'm going to get to this point in a second. But anyways, but he sought their conversion. He did not seek their destruction. If you truly love, Jesus said, love your enemies. So even if somebody attacked you, your attempt is to save them. Your attempt is to bring them to light. It's not to, whip them. That's not what the desire is to their salvation. There's a post by Bishop Barron on X a few days ago, or whatever, a week ago. He was saying, I visited my rabbi friends in Jerusalem, Shabbat Shalom. And I asked him, so did you actually tell them about Jesus Christ, that they need to convert to him, to the truth, so they might be saved? Do you actually love your friends? Do you truly love them by telling them the truth or not? Of course, I got no response, but that's fine. So that's the thing. We have to understand, we cannot go hating them. If you truly, and again, you have to understand, even in the Old Testament, like you will see that in Abraham, and if you read the Old Testament, you'll see that actually the sins, as it says, sins of the fathers pass to the kids, not necessarily that they are personally guilty of it, but the consequences of that sin passes on through the generations. Sin of Adam, even in the various parts of the Old Testament, it's kind of like it is in the seed of the man that his generation will have consequences. But again, God does not personally, as it says, the son's father's sins are not directly part of the son's sins, but the consequences of the sin is, the consequences of the crucifixion of Jesus was the destruction of the temple and the end of, end of the Old Testament. The destruction of the temple signified the end of the Old Covenant and the beginning of the new priesthood, new temple, which is the church, and new sacrifice, which is in Malachi. It says the sacrifice, which is from the rising of the sun to its setting, offered everywhere. And his name is great among the Gentiles. And again, before we the term Jews, which I don't really like, because if you read the Old New Testament, I know I harp and I talk a bit too long before I get to the article, but look at the New Testament. You will see a lot of times it says, well, Jesus went away or slipped away because of fear of the Jews, and the apostles fear of what? And when I was a kid, I was thinking, like, what do you mean? What do you mean fear of the Jews? Aren't they all a bunch of Jews? Like, what do you mean fear of the Jews? Well, it's more in Arabic. The Jews is Yehudi, and Judea is Yehudeya. It's the same word. So it is the Judeans, because what we could call Israel had different provinces, different parts. Judea, Galilee, Samaria, and another one or two more places. So that's why he is a Galilean. Okay, well, technically he's a Jew in a sense because he's a Hebrew, he's an Israelite. But so when they say, the Judeans, meaning the Jews, which is, so this is what we have to understand when it says, Jesus ran away because of, he slipped away because the Jews wanted to kill him. Well, he went, where did he go? Did he go to France? No, he didn't. He went just to the town down the street in Galilee, because it means the Judeans, the rulers of Judea. All right. So let's got that point out of the way. All right, let's get into the article. And hopefully, I have a lot of things playing in my head. Hopefully I don't kind of forget. But anyways, so let's go. From the Torah, the Torah.com, so it's not coming from anybody else. It's from the Torah website. Did the Jews crucify Jesus? The Gospels present Pontius Pilate, the Roman procurator, condemning Jesus to death, and his soldiers crucifying Jesus at the behest of the priests and the Jewish crowd. How then did the claim found in the Talmud? So how did the claim found in the Talmud? So it's not a Christian attack on on Jews, it is found in the Talmud that the Jews physically crucified Jesus developed. Professor Tamás Visi. So, the claim that the Jews killed Jesus is one of the most devastating anti-Jewish narratives in history. Well, it's not a claim. I mean, it is clear from, again, what do you mean by Jews? It is the Judeans. He is the king of the Judeans. It has a long past and continues into modern times. This claim developed in two stages. So the first claim, which of course we all know, is that the Jews were indirectly responsible for the execution of Jesus. Yes, because they asked Pilate to condemn Jesus to death. Otherwise, they were going to revolt. And a little petty governor like Pilate didn't want more trouble on his hands. So it's like, okay, fine, you people. The second claim, which I have never heard, is that the Jews executed Jesus themselves. I don't know where he got that claim from, but he's going to kind of twist his words to make it sound like that. While the rabbis in the Talmud, I believe they were talking about stoning Jesus first before him being hanged, crucified. Anyways, let's continue. On the face of it, this latter claim, meaning that the Jews themselves executed Jesus, is striking, given that, at least according to rabbinic texts, admittedly later than the time of Jesus, crucifixion was not a Jewish method. So how could the Jews have executed Jesus? While it was widely used by Romans, and yet the Talmud itself includes a Babylonian Baraita, which is the Sanhedrin one, that has the Jews executing, perhaps even crucifying Jesus. So now here you would get the text of again, this is not coming from somebody weird. It is coming from the Torah.com, written by Torah experts. And actually, we have to say that these are kind of these guys are more of a modernist Torah readers, like with textual criticism. So they're not taking it like, they're taking it as, okay, well, this is part of like, the priestly version. This is the Yahweh's version, but they are Torah experts. I have never heard that the Jews physically crucified Jesus. Neither have I. So I have no idea where that comes from. Anyways, but you will see kind of his ideas of how that developed. All right, let's get back into it. So here's the quote from the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud itself. The Talmud of the sages, because if you insult the sages, and actually that's what it says in several books, if you insult the sages, and actually even if you watch some of the rabbis online, you basically committed blasphemy. You cannot be saved almost, because if you insult the sages. All right, so anyways, here's what the quote from the Baraita, Sanhedrin 43a. On the eve of the Passover, they hanged / crucified Jesus the Nazarene, and a herald went forth. So it doesn't really say they, it doesn't really explain who the they is. Anyways, and a herald went forth before him 40 days, heralding. So this is how the sages put it into the Talmud to show that, okay, we did everything we had to do according to following the law. So what did the heralds do? They herald Jesus the Nazarene is going forth to be stoned because he practiced sorcery and instigated and seduced Israel into idolatry. Whoever knows anything in his defense may come and state it. But since they did not find anything in his defense, they hanged / crucified him on the eve of the Passover. So I want to say that the way this author's understanding the term they, meaning like somebody that physically does it himself. I can threaten somebody to do something for me, and they do it for me. And in a sense, I'm the one who did it because I threatened violence or revolt or whatever I threatened this other person against if he doesn't do what I want. So in a sense, I did it. But in fact, physically, he did it. It's like somebody hiring a hitman. Okay, well, yeah, the hitman did the job, but who's the one really originally did it? And even Jesus himself, when he was talking with Pilate, and Jesus told him, I came for this reason, to bear witness to the truth. And Pilate was telling him, you know what, I can crucify you. I have the power over life and death over you. And then Jesus told him, you wouldn't have that power unless it was given to you by my Father who is in heaven. So God, the Father, gives the power of execution to governors. And then he says, Jesus tells Pilate, you know what, yes, you'll be guilty. So he'll be guilty, but the greater sin is to those who have handed me over to you. So they have the greater sin because they are the ones responsible for the action. So, but again, remember that Jesus laid down his life by his own will. Nobody took his life from him, but he laid it down by his own will. So, to understand how the claim about Jews killing Jesus developed, we will start with the gospel stories of the New Testament. Okay, Jews turn Jesus over to the Romans. Using Mark, the earliest gospel, as the baseline, the story of Jesus' execution begins when he is arrested by the chief priests in reference to the family or families of Kohanim that control the temple. Kohanim is the exact same word as in Arabic, kahana, meaning priests. Afterwards, he is tried and convicted because of his claim to be Messiah, son of the Blessed One. Mark 24. Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, we do not need any more witnesses. All of them condemned him as deserving death. So as deserving death doesn't mean that they themselves took them and crucified him. Jesus is then mocked, beaten by the priests and their officers. And I'm highlighting this point because he will go through several other instances where Jesus is mocked. And he will claim, oh, Luke took it from, it's a completely separate instance where Jesus is being mocked, but he will attempt to say, well, you know what, it's the same incident, but Luke changed it. But we're going to see it in a second. Okay. Jesus is then mocked and beaten by the priests and their officers. So he quotes Mark, somebody started to spit on him, strike him, telling him to prophesy. So these were the guards of the high priest at that incident. So, okay. Following a scene in which Peter pretends that he doesn't know Jesus, I have some highlighted here. I just want to make sure I don't miss any of the quotes I have. But anyways, hopefully I'll remember them. The story continues with the chief priests turning Jesus over to the Roman procurator, Pontius Pilate, and laying out their accusation before him. So it just quotes it about, it quotes Jesus, tell Pilate, it says, they're accusing you. You don't have any answers, So Mark then tells us that in honor of the festival, Pilate, notice this, I'm highlighting it for a reason. Pilate used to free one prisoner. Now he tries to debunk this claim by saying, though no Roman source corroborates the existence of any such practice. Okay, well, just because it's not a practice, standard practice of the Roman procurators or generals, does not mean that a certain general decides to do it of his own will. The Roman Empire was huge, and not every province was governed exactly in the same manner. And for the guy who wants to keep peace in Judea and doesn't want any problems, he wants to bribe the people he is ruling over. So this was Pilate's custom, which is what the New Testament says. It doesn't say it's a Roman custom. It's what Pilate did. and asks whether he should release Jesus, but the people ask for Barabbas, meaning son of the father. Then it's a quote. And he talks about Pilate spoke to them again. Then what do you want me to do? Do you want me to? Then what do you wish me to do with the man you call King of the Jews? They shouted back, crucify him. Then Pilate says, what did he do? They just say, well, just crucify the guy. Again, remember that the people were following the instigation of their priests, who were convincing them that this is a good thing to do. Then the Gospel of Matthew, which had Mark as one of its sources. Again, that's using we know from St. Irenaeus, which was in my previous video, that actually Mark wrote the Gospel according to Peter, Luke wrote the Gospel according to Luke, John wrote the Gospel according to himself, and Matthew wrote his Gospel too. So, but of course, using the textual criticism thing, they say, well, he is the source. Yeah, he might have known the story, he might have glanced at it, but it doesn't mean he copied it. But anyways, the Gospel of Matthew, which had Mark as one of its sources, adds an extra scene here, which with Pilate explicitly laying blame of Jesus' death on the Jews, and they're accepting the blame with relish. So the quotation is, of course, we all know it, where Pilate tries to let Jesus go, and then the people, no, you crucify him. So Pilate says, you know what, I'm not crucified, I'm not responsible for his death, I don't see anything he's worthy of death for. But the people shout back, and then they say, the blood, then the people as a whole, answered, his blood be on us and on our children. So basically, this is the guilt. So that's why Jesus says, those who handed me over to you have the greater guilt. But again, these were immediately them. Their descendants 2,000 years later don't necessarily have the same guilt, in my opinion, but they have suffered the consequences. And what's the greater suffering than loss of salvation? No temple, no priesthood, no sacrifice, no forgiveness of sins. I mean, the sacrifices were to cover their sins. So none of that. And what is the end of no forgiveness of sins? It's death. And death meaning separation from God. What greater evil can one even imagine? Again, it quotes more of the attempts of Pilate, so I'm not going to go through it. So Pilate then gave a verdict that their demand should be granted. So that's why when it says he gave him to them, it's their demand. So he says, okay, grant them their demand. So sending Jesus to be executed. So returning to Mark, Pilate now releases Barabbas, and having already condemned Jesus, sends him off to be executed. So here's a quotation from Mark. I don't have Mark. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them. And after, so the key word again, and I always would think about it, so after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. So, because in the scene in John, Jesus is brought in front of the crowd while he has the crown of thorns, and he's maybe covered with the purple cloak after he was flogged and humiliated. After that, because I was thinking, okay, well, he just flogged him like right away. They scourged him and they crucified him right away. No. Because he says, so Mark is not, or Matthew is not giving you the full details. It's just, after he did this, he crucified him. Because Pilate says, in another part, which he will quote, is that Pilate says, you know what, I'm going to scourge him or flog him or punish him, and then I'm going to let him go. So which is Pilate, exactly did that, brought him to the people, and the people said, no, you crucify him. So he couldn't let him go. And that's when you get now crucifixion of Jesus. So after flogging him, he handed him over to be crucified. Doesn't mean it happened instantly. It happened. He flogged him. He brought him to the people, and then he sent him to be crucified. So he says, of course, the crowd does not have authority over the procurator. The Gospels here present him as a weak, bullied by a mob, because he was being bullied. And if you read about Pilate, he was a weakling. He was not a very strong governor. Even so, only Pilate has the authority to execute Jesus. Yes, only Pilate had the authority, but he gave in to the demands of the crowd, as you see current day politicians giving way to the mob. Think of Antifa. Think of Black Lives Matter. Think of a whole bunch of other, the Chaz in Seattle. So yes, the authority is given to the mob, even though they are ultimately have the authority. But it is the mob who is responsible more than the authority is giving in. So anyways, Roman soldiers crucified Jesus. So the Roman soldiers carry out Pilate's sentence. And the soldiers led him away inside the palace, that is the Praetorium, and they called together the whole cohort. So he explains the cohort. Spera was a Roman military unit, one of the 10 divisions of the legion. The Praetorium meant originally the tent of the praetor, a Roman official, and in extended sense, it referred to a military headquarters of the Roman governor's residence. Thus, Mark had in mind the Roman soldiers under the command of Pontius Pilate. The continuation of the text relates, the Roman soldiers mocked and tortured Jesus. So now we can see the second time Jesus is mocked, and really, in a sense, tortured, because he was slapped by the high priests and their guards. That's the first insult. That's the second insult. Then led him to the place of crucifixion. So first of all, he was flogged, then mocked and tortured, then brought to the people who insisted that he be crucified. So Pilate released back Jesus to his soldiers, told them, okay, take him to. He released it to them, because he was talking about John saying, Pilate released, the Jews wanted Jesus crucified, so Pilate released him to them, and they took him to be crucified. Meaning he gave in to their demands. But of course, this guy, a professor, is such a literalist, he has zero understanding of language. And he has the quote that they clothed him in a purple cloak and plaited a crown of thorns and saluted him and mocked him. So when they arrive at Golgotha, the Roman soldiers crucify him and divide his belongings amongst them. And then they put the sign, he is the King of the Jews. Later, Mark mentions a centurion who oversaw the execution and reported back to Pilate. A Latin word, centurion, a Latin loan word, which underscores that he means a Roman official, adds that Pilate ordered a squad of Roman soldiers to guard Jesus' tomb. Using a Latin loan word, custodia, watchguard, these soldiers were also responsible to Pontius Pilate. Again, they are responsible to Pontius Pilate, but Pilate did it because, remember, it was the high priest who asked Pilate, the priest asked Pilate, oh, send guards to guard the tomb because we don't want him to steal the body of Jesus. So that's his wife, yes. So a logical inconsistency. Okay, here's the so-called logical inconsistency in the Passion narrative. Mark's scene in which the Roman soldiers mock and torture Jesus is in the Praetorium is in profound tension with the previous scene in which Pilate is unwilling to sentence Jesus and makes several attempts to save his life before caving into the pressure of the Jewish crowd against his better judgment. Now here's his, kill shot in his opinion. He says, if Roman soldiers mock and torture Jesus in Pilate's own residence, it is certain that this is in accord with his wishes. And yet Pilate is depicted as being troubled by the need to condemn Jesus, saying explicitly that he finds no fault in the man. So again, this is kind of stupid, to be blunt. It is stupid because even nowadays, see what soldiers do. If a soldier in a state of war, especially now you're an occupying army, you're a soldier in these, these people you're ruling, they want to kill you, they want to stab you, they hate your guts. So when you get a chance to torture one of their own, you do it with pleasure because you're in a state of, you've been ruling this Judean land for so long. You're just like, okay, let's have some fun, guys. We got some guy who thinks he's a king. Let's go and beat him up. So Pilate ordered was the flogging, the scourging. That's it. So they did that. But then afterwards, they said, well, you know what? Let's have some fun, boys. Let's bring this guy and have some fun. And that's when, it doesn't mean Pilate never knew every single one. And these soldiers are a bunch of robots who only follow the exact desire and will of their commander. No, it's nothing like that. Even nowadays, the soldiers do all kinds of garbage. Look at Iraq and what the U.S. soldiers did. Did the President of the United States order their soldiers to torture these people in Abu Ghraib or wherever? No, but they wanted to have some fun. Let's humiliate these guys and torture them and mock them. Does this mean the general ordered them to do that? No, it doesn't. So this guy is trying to come up with some excuses to put doubt into the account. So there is no mistake. There is no tension. Only if you read into it. Moreover, what is described here as the spontaneous kicking and spitting, we find earlier in the court of the chief priests. Yes, because it was done at the chief priests, and then it was done later with... I've got a relaxed reminder on my watch. Okay, whatever. So it happened later with the Roman soldiers. What's the big deal? But a coordinated, so it was, it's not a spontaneous kicking and spitting like what happened with the priest, but a coordinated program of humiliating Jesus. Where is the coordinated program? It's a bunch of soldiers who said, you know what, let's humiliate that guy and have some fun. We're sick of, being soldiers and guards. Let's have some fun, boys. Humiliating Jesus, the charismatic leader of a significant number of Jews, as the king of the Jews. Of course, if you're an occupying force and you're like, oh, you think you're the leader of these hoodlums? All right, you're their king. All right, let's show the king some kingly action. Let's compete with props, the crown of thorns, and the purple garment. Neither the chief priest nor the Jewish crowd is said to have forced Pilate to engage in such a humiliating campaign. But according to the Talmud, they wanted to stone him. You can actually see it in the Gospels themselves when Jesus said the I am, which of course Cantalamessa, Mesa, preacher of Pope Francis, said Jesus, the real Jesus, the historical Jesus, the earthly Jesus never really said any of the I am statements. So when Jesus said before Abraham, I am, the crowd wanted to stone Jesus Christ. And if they could just stone him to death because he blasphemed. So yeah, it says neither the chief priest nor the Jewish crowd is said to have forced Pilate to engage in such a humiliating campaign. But Pilate did not engage in that campaign because his soldiers, of their own accord, decided to have some fun with this Jewish guy who thinks he's a king. And I'm pretty sure the high priest and the crowd who wanted Jesus dead enjoyed it when they saw him with the crown of thorns brutally mangled in front of them, and they still wanted him dead. So anyways, this brutal image of Pilate probably corresponds to historical reality. Probably. Again, he will notice in a certain part he has a lot of wiggle words. Anyways, probably corresponds to historical reality. First of all, crucifixion, is crowd control, as Paula Fredrickson argues. So basically, the crucifixion was meant to scare the people. You do that, that's what's going to happen to you. Yeah, understood. I mean, that's why it was not just... Now, they say, again, it just occurred, actually, I think it occurred to me before. But if you say that it was the Jews who physically executed Jesus, well, who crucified the two thieves on his left and the right? Was it the Jews themselves who crucified other Jews on the left and the right of Jesus? No. It was all the Roman soldiers at the instigate, for Jesus Christ at least, at the instigation of the high priests, the rulers of the Judeans, the rulers of the Jews. Mark inherited the story and included these famous scenes of torture in his gospel, but at the same time he wished to shift at least some of the blame for the execution from the Roman procurator to the Jews. Well, the Roman procurator would not ever have given Jesus a second look if it wasn't for the Judean leadership, priests, the scribes, and the Pharisees. And you always hear in modern scholarship, oh, the priests were all Sadducees and the rabbis were all Pharisees. But actually, if you read in the Gospels, you will notice that the priests sent people of their own, priests and Levites, who were of both parties, Pharisees and Sadducees, just as an aside here. So he added the scene which Pilate states that, as if he's making up a story, like Cardinal Cantalamessa talking about Jesus's I am statements. Oh, they're made up stories, to pass on the faith, So that he doesn't think, so that he added, so he says, as Mark added the story that Pilate, didn't really think Jesus was guilty of anything. And the fictional account, how do you know it's fictional? Of agreeing to free a prisoner. The fictional account of agreeing to free a prisoner. There is no evidence that that Roman procurators had such a practice. But again, Mr. Stupid Professor, it is not necessarily a Roman practice. A governor can have his own way of governing things. That's why governors were sometimes removed from their posts, because they could not govern correctly. And Pilate did not want to be removed from his post for a revolt. He had to deal with these insubordinate subjects. So he came up with Pilate's own idea of honoring the religious festival of the people he is governing by releasing to them a prisoner. Not everybody had the same religious customs as the Jews. So Roman custom practice would not span worldwide when they governed half of the world, because every area had its own customs. Understand, stupid professor? Okay. So he says, Pilate states that he doesn't think Jesus is guilty of anything, and the fictional account of agreeing to free a prisoner, no, it's not fictional. Again, there is no evidence that, so his accusation of this being fictional is that there is no evidence that Roman procurators had such a practice. Well, yeah, maybe not in Egypt, maybe not in Syria, maybe not in, wherever they were governing. But in this case, for one Roman procurator, he had his own custom, which is Pilate. With the crowd preferring Barabbas. In doing so, he created a tension in his gospel between the vicious Pilate and the sensitive Pilate. No such tensions exist. It is a man who is conflicted, a man who personally, especially after his wife told him to not harm Jesus, so he was listening to his wife who had this dream, and people in these days and even up to today, if they have a bad dream, they will think, what does this mean? What message am I getting? So he and very superstitious to an extreme sometimes. So when his wife, Pontius Pilate's wife, told him that we don't want to deal like this, Jesus, stay away from him, don't harm him. So, and on his logical side, well, I don't see anything really deserving of death here. So there is no tension of the sensitive Jesus, but he was, and a vicious Pilate. Pilate was not vicious in wanting to hurt Jesus, in wanting to humiliate him, in wanting to crucify him. No, he gave in to the crowd. He is the weak governor who gave in to the crowd. But again, remember, always I have to remind you that Jesus had the power to lay down his own life and take it up again. It was his will. Anyways, let's continue. This tension exists even in an even starker format in the Gospel of Matthew, but other retellings of the Passion narrative try to solve the problem as if it's a problem. It's only a problem if you don't understand language, if you are so literalist that your brain cannot comprehend the obvious, leading to three solutions. What are the solutions, Professor? Luke, what is Luke's solution? The soldiers of Herod Antipas, the Jewish ruler of Galilee, mock Jesus, not the soldiers of Pilate. Well, idiot professor, it was both of them. They mocked Jesus at the Jewish ruler of Galilee, Herod, and later on. So this is the third time Jesus gets mocked. So first time he gets mocked by the priests. Second time he gets mocked by the soldiers of Herod. The third time, always in triplicates, the third time he gets mocked and tortured by the soldiers of Pilate. John, what's the solution of John? Pilate orders his soldiers to mock and torture Jesus. False. Pilate ordered his soldiers to not torture but flog, or basically do the whipping of Jesus. He didn't ask them. So this was a punishment. It wasn't the mocking part, or let's put the crown of thorns on him. These were later done just for funsies, just for fun amongst the soldier boys, sentencing Jesus to death to try to make Jewish crowd pity the suffering Jesus. And post-New Testament narrative. So what is the post-New Testament narrative? The Jewish crowd and or Jewish guards mock and torture and even crucify Jesus. So I don't know where that comes from, but you will see. Anyways, so Luke, Herod Antipas, was responsible. Again, he's an idiot, this guy. In Luke's version of the story, Pilate learns that Jesus is of Galilean origin. Oh, wasn't he Jewish? Aren't they all Jews? No, there's the Galileans, there's the Judeans, there's the Samaritans. Nowadays, they're all Jews in our way of speaking. But to understand the New Testament, if you read, the Jews wanted to kill Jesus, but he goes to Samaria or goes to Galilee. How does that make any sense? Or goes across the Jordan. How does that make any sense? Are they all Jews? No, and when the New Testament talks about Jews, they're talking about Judeans, more specifically the religious authorities in Judea and Jerusalem. So, in Luke's version of the story, Pilate learns that Jesus is of Galilean origin. So what does he see, man? He says, well, yeah, that guy is a Galilean. So he sends him over to Herod, because Herod was the governor of Galilee, not Pontius Pilate. He said, you know what? Let this guy, he's Galilean. I don't have standing, as they say in court these days. I don't have standing. I don't have authority of this Galilean. So let the Galilean governor, judge another Galilean. I don't care. I want to get this problem out of my hands. So Galilee was not under direct Roman rule, but of course there's always influence. And Luke says, and when he learned that he was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him off to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at the time. So Herod was in Jerusalem at the time. So of course, Herod, being a king of Galilee, had his entourage, his soldiers, his entourage. Kind of like a rap star. He has his entourage wherever he goes. So of course, Herod had wanted to see Jesus for a long time and wanted Jesus to do miracles for him. But and then Jesus, of course, refused to do so. So what does he do? When Jesus refuses to, he mocks him and then refuses to condemn him to death. He says, let's just make fun of this guy and let's send him away. We don't care. Herod Antipas and his soldiers, he had a Hellenistic mercenary army recruited from various territories, mock Jesus and dress him in an elegant robe, a reimagining of the purple cloak in Mark. So this guy, this professor, is basically claiming that the purple cloak of the Roman soldiers who tortured Jesus and mocked him and put it is the same as the elegant cloak which Herod put on Jesus. But and this is completely different times. And he just makes this assumption as if it said a robe and these people put a robe. It must be the same robe. It's so stupid. Like, I mean, come on. Come on, man. Come on, man. Have some brains here. And actually you could tell from the story is that Herod actually admired Jesus. So yeah, let's make fun. Okay, let's put some nice robe on him and send him away. Even Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. So this is, as I said, this is first time was the priests mocked him and treated him with contempt. Second time was Herod, because Jesus refused to perform a miracle for him. And the third time was the soldiers of after he was scourged, which is the order of Pilate, was just a scourging. And then the soldier said, let's have some fun here. Let's blow off some steam and beat up this guy and let's make fun of him and make him a crown. He's a king after all, right? Even Herod and his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then he put an elegant robe on him and sent him back to Pilate. Okay, well, does that mean the same robe is the same robe? Luke's narrative has no parallel to the crown of thorns. Oh, but it said robe, so it must be the same robe. That's like a 5-year-old thinking. And to the other details of the Roman, and so it has no parallel to the crown of thorns and to the other details of the Roman soldiers mocking Jesus. How could this be? Wow, mystery of mysteries. Could it be that they were totally two separate incidents? Could it be? Luke gives only a nod to the mocking tradition, And even this is done by the Jewish tetrarch, not the Roman procurator. Well, we don't have to repeat the same story over and over again, right? No? Now, John's torture as a ploy, John's, understanding. So these are supposedly the solutions to the contradiction, which there isn't any. The author of the Gospel of John, turn of the 1st century A.D., solved the problem by rearranging the sequence of events. Did he actually rearrange the sequence of events? The answer is no, not really. He just put more details into the sequence of events. Of the Passion narratives, in his telling, Pilate has Jesus tortured and humiliated after Jewish crowd chooses Barabbas, but before his fate is sealed. So as I said, yeah, Pilate has, after they, and you see the wanting, he knows he has to release somebody to them. He knows they don't want Jesus. So he he sends him to be scourged, but just for the fun of it, his soldiers torture him, humiliate him. And then they bring him up. And then, because you will see, I don't know if I have it quoted here, because I did put a lot of, let me just have a quick peek here. Oh, okay. All right. Actually, I want to just share this for a second, and then we're going to get back to it. Just for a second. Because he pretends there was some kind of a contradiction. But this is according to St. Luke, chapter 23. And Pilate, calling together the chief priests and the magistrate and the people, said to them, so whatever he said, and then he tells them, look, I will chastise him, therefore, and release him. So there is no contradiction. So Pilate actually in Luke tells you that, yeah, he was going to punish him and release him. So in John, it explains it further that he actually punished him, brought him to the crowd, and showed him the state, and he wanted to release him, but the crowd did not want to release him. They wanted him crucified. So this, again, this is... there is no contradiction unless you are blind. So before his fate is sealed. So of course, it talks about the crown of thorns and they mocked him. Pilate then returns to the crowd and thinks Jesus is innocent of wrongdoing altogether. Thus the Roman soldiers mock Jesus on the order of Pilate. false professor, falsy professor from the Czech Republic. Show me one sentence where Pilate actually orders his soldiers to mock Jesus. No, he did not order them to mock Jesus. He ordered them to chastise him, which was, we know, is the scourging. This is what Pilate ordered. He didn't order them to make fun of him, to slap him, to put the crown of thorns on him, and to kneel in front of him, and put the purple cloak on him. No. That's the soldiers mock Jesus on the order of Pilate? No. They did not mock him on the order of Pilate. They mocked him because it was just a fun thing to do. That's it. And blow off some steam, and it was the fun thing to do with this Jew who thinks he's a king. So he says, thus the Roman soldiers mocked Jesus on the order of Pilate in the gospel, just as in Mark and Matthew. But the scene is moved to the middle of the trial, suggesting that it was as Raymond Brown, a modernist Society of Jesus priest, as I recall, argued, arranged by Pilate as a ploy to win sympathy of the Jews for Jesus, thus pitiably disfigured. Yes, because Pilate himself tells you in Luke that he will chastise him and then release him. So because he thought, well, these priests, they want him dead. But if I, punish him, okay, that's punished. They might say, well, the punishment is enough. But Pilate did not order the mocking. And there was no rearranging. It was simply, as I said, it is clear. Pilate says, I'm going to do this and then release him. So he did it, brought him to the crowd, and the crowd wanted him crucified. So there is no rearranging. There is no splitting. It is a further detail in John's gospel. John suggests that Pilate's purpose is mocking Jesus. No, Pilate's purpose was to release Jesus, but let me just punish him so hopefully I can win the crowd over and I don't have a revolt on my hands. So was to save him, but this ploy has no effect on the chief priests and the Jewish crowd who demand Jesus to be executed. Anyways, and then it's a quote from the Pilate interrogates Jesus again and tries yet again to get the Jews to allow him to set Jesus free. But the Jews, again, the Judeans, I have to say, who lived in Judea, actually claimed that this would express disloyalty to Caesar because they want to influence Pilate. Says, look, what, are you going to release a guy who thinks he's a king? They're trying to convince him. You're not doing it for us, even though we want him dead, but you're doing it for you, for your own benefit. First of all, you're going to kill some guy who thinks he's a king. Second of all, if you don't, we're going to revolt. And you really don't want Caesar to see big disturbances in Judea. You know what that does to your political future, right, Pilate? You know what it's going to do to your political future, right? I mean, just this, Pilate, is for your own good. We love you, man. We have no king but Caesar. We love you. We don't want you to lose your job. So you better kill that guy who thinks he's king, because otherwise, if you don't, we might not be happy, and that would not be good for you. And if we were living in modern times, we'd probably take you to court with court case after court case after court case to bankrupt you and destroy you politically. If we were living in the democracies of the West these days. But since we're back in the Middle East back then, we would just revolt. And then you'd have to attack us, and then Caesar would not be too happy with you, and you'd lose your job. Do you really want that, Pilate? Don't think so. Don't think so. So this is he quotes the crowd saying, "Crucify him, crucify him." Then so Pilate says, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." What, Pilate? Are you disloyal to Caesar? Are you saying that Caesar is not your king? Are you instigating revolt against Caesar, Pilate? I mean, these are the words Pilate probably be hearing in his head. Then Pilate says, you know what? I'm sick of this garbage. Fine. Then he handed him over to them to be crucified. They took Jesus. So the to them and they, the author, the professor, saying, well, that means the Jews. And literally, that it's the Jews themselves who took Jesus, and literally it was the Jews or the Judeans or the high priests who took Jesus, and they took him and crucified him. As Ramsey Michael says in this comment on his commentary on John, to them can only refer to the Jews or the chief priests, in spite of the clear implication that crucifixion was a Roman, not a Jewish method of execution. We now learn that the Jews will crucify Jesus after all. No, you must be a total idiot and don't understand basics of language when you do something for somebody, even though you don't want to do it. Like when there is even in the current days, when a government puts somebody to death, executes a murderer, is it the government doing for itself, or is it doing it on behalf of the people? It is doing it for the people. It is doing it for the benefit of the people, to keep the peace and safety of the people. So in a sense, it's the people who actually did the execution. It's the same thing. So it is not, he released to them. Yeah, I was like, you know what, you want him dead, you want him, fine, you can have him. So the soldiers, the actual Roman soldiers, are the one who do the execution, but he released it to them, meaning fine, he gave in to them. Fine, go ahead, fine, you can take him. You can take him and kill him. Contradictory claims in the Gospel of John. Are they really contradictory claims? I have all these open tabs from the scriptures. I'm hoping I'm not missing something, but it doesn't matter. I'll do a final go around over quickly in case I miss something. Anyways, contradictory claims in the Gospel of John. Are they contradictory, or are you just too stupid to understand them? That's the question. This scene is contradicted when John describes the history of the crucifixion, and we hear again the familiar claim that it was the soldiers who did it. So he quotes John, when the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his garments and made 4 parts, one for each, also his tunic. So he quotes John as saying that Pilate released Jesus to them, and they took him. And of course, he takes the conjecture that it must be literally, it was the Jews themselves who did this. And then it's like, but John himself contradicts himself. He claims that it was the soldiers who crucified him. How is this possible? Because there is no problem. It is only if you have a mental defect and don't understand basic language and how people talk that you might have a problem with this. Or a more likely scenario, the purpose of these contradictions is to poke holes into the whole New Testament and call it a fairy tale, and nobody knew anything about anything, and it was just an anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish invention. I mean, that could be, even though the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud itself, the wisdom of the sages themselves says contrary-wise. They admit it, as you quoted at the beginning of your article. Blaming the Jews entirely. Well, as I said, it is a person who, like Jesus said, the greatest sin is the one who handed me over to you, Pilate. When Jesus was talking with Pilate, yes, you're guilty, but the greater sin belongs to those who handed me over. This is the greater sin. So it's not like he's sinless, because he first of all gave in to the crowd. He gave in to the mob rule. The third solution entails a more radical revision of the passion narratives, so making up your own story, than the previous ones. The mocking crucifixion of Jesus was attributed entirely to the Jews. Mocking and crucifixion, well, he was mocked by the high priest, and then he was mocked by Herod, and then he was mocked by the Roman soldiers. So all 3 mocked him. If Jesus was mocked by the Jewish crowd and not by Pilate's soldiers, No, you idiot, he was mocked by both. Then the logical inconsistency of the archaic passion narrative disappears. No, there is no inconsistency because you are too stupid to understand it. This solution was a long and complicated story. Its roots go back to the New Testament. You crucified Jesus, Peter's rhetorical hyperbole. Actually, this basically explains that the actions, because you have to recall, as I mentioned at the beginning, the people are connected with the leadership. So when the leadership orders something or wants something done, it is the people are one with their leadership, especially their religious leadership. So when Peter says on Pentecost, you crucified him, and Jesus says to his contemporaries, the Pharisees, you killed the prophets. What prophets did we kill? Well, it's their ancestors who killed the prophets. So the sin, in a sense, or the consequence of their sin is upon them. So Peter says, you killed Jesus, you crucified him. Even though they were coming from Arabia, they're coming from Egypt, they were not even in Jerusalem at the time, but they were coming for the festival. So it is basically a religious, as long as you adhere to what the high priests and their will was, you share in their sin, in a sense. Okay, so let's go back to this thing. You crucified Jesus, Peter's rhetorical hyperbole. In the Acts of the Apostles, the second part of the Gospel of Luke, which describes what happens with Jesus' followers after the crucifixion, Peter, Jesus' chief disciple, which is obvious in the New Testament for anybody who has eyes to see. So Protestants, Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, it's clear. And I mentioned it in the video, which is like 2 hours. Peter, because some really, I don't know, is he Catholic anymore? Who says, well, the Pope doesn't have primacy or jurisdiction. The church wasn't even founded on Peter. Okay, well, there you go. But you can see it from the New Testament that Peter's always listed first as the head of the apostles in the list of the apostles, even though he was not the first to be chosen, which was Andrew. He is always the spokesman of the apostles. He was at the Council of Jerusalem, the one who declared the faith, and James backed him up and gave the disciplinary measures based upon the declaration of Peter of the faith in the first Council of Jerusalem in the Acts of the Apostles. So anyways, Peter's chief apostles charges his fellow Jews. But was Peter a Jew? No, Peter was a Galilean. See, who was talking to the Judeans with crucifying Jesus. Remember when the apostles went and hid in the upper room for fear of the Jews? They're fear of the Judeans, not of the Galileans, not of the Samaritans. Charges his fellow Jews with crucifying Jesus by handing him. How did he accuse him of crucifying Jesus? How? By handing him over to the Romans. So this is the speech of St. Peter on Pentecost. Fellow Israelites. So they are all, so this is what I want to kind of emphasize. They are all Israelites, the sons of Israel. But when the New Testament talks about Jews, it specifically is talking about Judeans, those living in Judea. And then there are the Galileans, and then there are the Samaritans, but they're all Israelites. Okay. So if Peter says, fellow Israelites, listen to what I have to say. Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you by God, with deeds of power, wonder, and signs of God, did through him among you, as you yourselves know. So there were, of course, people living there who knew, and those coming from other parts of the world didn't know, but they probably heard the rumors. this man handed over to you according to definite plan and foreknowledge of God. So this man handed over to you according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God. So God himself had that definite plan and foreknowledge. You crucified and killed by the hands of those outside the law. So here Peter says clearly that now the guilt falls upon all Israelites who refuse the Son of Man, predicted, the Son of God, predicted, the prophet, predicted. Remember, Moses says to them that a prophet will come. I don't remember the exact citation, but Moses tells the Jews, the Israelites at the time, a prophet will be coming after me, and him you will listen to, him you will follow. Not me anymore, not my law, not my covenant, but him, the prophet. And of course, Daniel has the prophecy of when the Son of Man is coming. The Son of Man, who I have a review in one of the books, is actually a divine being. And why, like, what confused me as a kid and even as an adult was, you read in the New Testament, you see the people asking Jesus, are you the prophet? Are you the one to come? Are you the prophet? Like, why? Like, who goes around like in some city and people start asking, are you the prophet? Like, there was, and the reason was, there was an expectation. In Eusebius, the history of the church, he has a chronology basically of the book of Daniel and how all these conditions that basically the book of Daniel at that, his 70 weeks, and I can't recall at the moment, basically predicted the time of the arrival of the Son of Man. And even it says he will be crucified, he will be killed. So the expectation of the Messiah, of the Mashiach, of the prophet predicted by Moses, of the Son of Man to come, was at that time of Jesus. That's why people were saying, oh, are you the prophet? Are you the son? Are you the one to come? That's the reason for these questions at the time. It was not insanity, because they had the prophecies of Daniel telling them when this was going to be coming. So, and he says, Peter says that you crucified and killed by the hands of those outside the law. Outside the law are the Romans, are the Gentiles, the nations. So you killed him. How? By the hands of them, by the hands of the Romans. So it's like somebody hiring a hitman and asking the hitman to go kill somebody else. Okay, so the hitman does the killing. So by the hands of the hitman, that person actually killed this other person. So it is the guilt goes to the person who did the instigation. And of course, he says you in general, because there were priests and Levites and so forth around them at the same time, and they told the people to agree to their will. And you remember at the end of the speech, people panic and say to St. Peter, like, what can we do to be saved? What do we do to be saved? He tells them, repent, do penance, and be baptized. And 3,000 people got baptized in the name of Jesus Christ and became followers of the way. And they were all following the teaching of the apostles, as it says in the New Testament, in the Acts. So again, St. Peter, when he's talking to them, not out of hatred, but out of to enlighten them that this is the promised Messiah who is killed according to the prophecy of Daniel. Anyways, Jews killed Jesus, a redaction of 1 Thessalonians. So the claim, we're almost over anyways, the claim that the Jews killed Jesus appears in Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians, one of the earliest texts of the New Testament. Notably, the claim does not occur in the narrative about Jesus' death, but in a speech addressed to a group of followers in Thessalonica. The anti-Jewish sounding sentiment, well, Paul himself says, I'm a Jew of Jews, I'm an Israelite of Israelite, I'm a Pharisee of Pharisees. And even when St. Paul is attacking his former co-religionists, he is as well he says, I'm ready to die. I'm ready to be damned if they will be saved instead of me. So this shows you the love of St. Paul to the Jews, the Judeans, the Israelites. He says, I'm ready myself to be damned that they might be saved. So this should be our desire for not only the Jews, but for the Muslims who claim Jesus simply a prophet, or anyone else, that we would want their salvation. So that was why Jesus told us and told the apostles to preach the gospel to all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, and to command them to follow everything he has taught them, the apostles. So, but of course, these days this is called proselytism, and it's against the dignity of man. So it's better that they be damned than to come to the knowledge of the truth. Anyways, so the anti-Jew is sounding to your ears who have a certain way of hearing things. In the passage is surprising because it's not true, given that Paul himself is a Jew, believed that Israel's disbelief in Christ was only temporary, that Israel would accept Jesus as Messiah in future, and thus all Israel will be saved. Yeah, okay. But note the phrase in bold. Yes, note the phrase in bold, because we can get to the phrase in bold. His insinuation, it is even though he just said that this is one of the earliest writings of the New Testament in his letter to the Thessalonians. He says it's a perversion. Anyways, let's see. We'll look at the phrase in bold, which sounds like they came from a time after Paul, even though he just said that the whole book of Thessalonians was one of the earliest books ever written of the New Testament. Anyways, so here's the quote. For you, brethren, became imitators of the churches of God. So the churches in Thessalonica became imitators of the churches of God in Christ Jesus, which are in Judea. So the churches which are in Judea. And if you read the Apostolic Fathers, St. Ignatius of Antioch, and others, you will always see it's not the church of the Romans, the church of the Ephesians, the church of Antioch, or the church of Alex. No. It's not written like this at all. It is always written the church in Rome, the church in Alexandria, the church in Ephesus. And this is how it is, because the church is in these places. This is not the church of these places. It's not the church of England, the church of Rome, the church of Alexandria. No, it is the church in these places, the true church anyways. So he says, for you, brethren, became imitators of the churches of God in Christ, which are in Judea. For you suffered the same from your own countrymen as they did from the Jews. There's nothing evil in this. He says, you, people in Thessalonica, have suffered from your own countrymen, other Thessalonians, however that's said. They were suffered persecution, the same as the churches in Judea suffered from their fellow countrymen, the Judeans. There's nothing evil about this. It is just explaining a fact that the churches in Judea were persecuted by Judeans, non-believers, and the churches in Thessalonica were persecuted by Thessalonians, again, the non-believing Thessalonians, the pagans. And then he talks about the Jews who killed both the Lord Jesus and the prophets. As if this is Jesus himself tells the Pharisees, you have killed the prophets. Even though technically it wasn't the people standing right in front of them who killed the prophets, it was their ancestors. It was the people. Like you see nowadays, even the biggest stupidity there is, we need reparations for slavery. Reparations. Why? That's, for example, in California, there's no slavery was never in California, but we need reparations. Well, we never had slaves here. And even if we did, we haven't, even in a country place where they had slaves, not the whole population. It was a few select rich people who had their slaves. Oh, no, we need reparations, that we need to punish the people of now to pay people, the descendants of after 200 years of slaves, and we don't know if they're descendants or they came from like Uganda, 10 years ago, and now because their skin color is darker, oh, no, they need reparations too. I mean, this is basically the stupidity of the story here. So yeah, that's the point, is like in the past, so this idea that Jesus is conveying is that, yeah, you killed the prophets, like meaning your ancestors. So of course you're going to reject me, the prophet, predicted by Moses. So Paul here is basically equating the suffering of his brethren in the churches in Thessalonica from Thessalonians, the pagans, and the churches in Judea from the Judeans in Judea. And the Judeans have killed both as the nation, which includes himself, Paul, killed the prophets, but not the Lord. Actually, Paul would admit that he himself killed the Lord Jesus because he was attacking the followers of Jesus. And Jesus, when he appeared to Saul, told him, "Why are you, Saul, persecuting me?" So yes, so even Paul himself was a persecutor of Jesus Christ. He was a killer of Jesus Christ, St. Paul, and drove us out. So the Judeans drove us out, and displeased God, oppose everyone. How do the Judeans, the Jews, oppose everyone? How? By hindering us from speaking. So by telling people, don't speaking to the Gentiles that they might be saved. So they don't want us to speak about the Lord Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of Man, the Son of God, the prophet predicted by Moses, to the Gentiles, because if we tell the Gentiles the Gentiles might be saved. So colloquially, the Jews, really the Judeans, don't want us to say these things so that you may be saved. And that is what displeases God, because that's why they oppose everyone, by hindering the gospel. So as always, to fill up the measure of their sins. But God's wrath has come upon them at last. So this is the translation here, at last. The last line sounds like a reference to destruction so it sounds like a reference to the destruction of the Second Temple. And thus would be a later interpolation into Paul's epistle, since Paul died before the temple was destroyed. It's not really the Second Temple, it's the Third Temple. Watch my video on Herod's Temple. It's the Third Temple. The First Temple was Solomon. The Second Temple was built after the exile. The Third Temple, Herod the Great tore down the Second Temple completely. He removed the very foundations of the temple. The temple was razed. There was nothing left, not even the foundation. Herod put brand new foundations and built a brand new temple on brand new foundations. And yet people call it the Second Temple, and they're awaiting the Third Temple. No, this is the third. If you take a house, you tear the whole house down. You say, "Oh, let's leave the foundations." No, let's rip out the whole foundations. Let's put brand new foundations in a brand new house. Does this make it the same house? No, it's another house. It's just your new house. So this is Herod's temple, was the Third Temple, just as an aside here, in which God came through, as in Ezekiel, you see. Okay, and would thus be an interpolation of Paul's epistle, since Paul died before the Second Temple, before the Third Temple was destroyed, the Temple of Herod. If this is correct, so it sounds like, and if it is correct, the interpolation interpolator was working with anti-Semitic discourse prevalent in the Roman Empire. No, it's nothing to do with that, because this, again, at last, has several meanings. And I have, let me see where I got this. I have all these. Let's see, because there's various translations. The old Vulgate, the Latin Vulgate translation. A lot of highlights. Just 1 second. 1 second. 1 second. 1 second. Oh, here we go. So it is, here's. Okay, I'm going to share this page. All right. So what does the actual, this translation from the JUDEANS or the Vulgate say? Got the wrong one here. Oh, I got the wrong one. Oh, here we go. Oh, here we go. All right, let's just kind of expand this for a second so you guys can see. Yeah. Anyways. So they're all adversarial men, prohibiting us to speak to the Gentiles that they may be saved, to fill up their sins always. For the wrath of God is come upon them to the end, not at last, but to the end. And it explains here the wrath of God has come upon them to the end, that is, to continue on them to the end. And what's worth the wrath, meaning the anger of God. And it is not just the JUDEANS or the Vulgate says that. The same translation is from the Aramaic. The Aramaic Bible has the exact same translation for the Thessalonians, and it says as well, to the last, just so you know, to the uttermost. So it says here, but the wrath of God is upon them to the uttermost, to the furthest. So this is the translation from the Aramaic Bible, and from the Arabic Bible, which is as well translated from the original languages. Have to remember, we go the other way. We go like the Jews, we go this way. We read right to left. So it says here, verse 15. Okay. Wow. Here, just for funsies, so you can see what it looks like in Arabic. Just for the fun of it, down here, it says, ولكن قد أدركهم. My Arabic is bad now. I forgot the law. الغضب. So ولكن قد أدركهم. Basically, الغضب إلى النهاية. الغضب إلى النهاية, meaning the anger till the end. So it is not at last it happened on them. No, this is not the. So Arabic translation is this anger till the end, and in the Aramaic to the uttermost, and in the Vulgate, St. Jerome's translation, or the English JUDEANS, up to the end. I wonder what it is in the Latin. What does it say? Infinem. So basically to that. So that's the whole translation he's talking about is kind of a false translation. It's not at last. So the whole point of him using this is to oh, the anti-Semitic sentiment. No, it's basically the consequences of this rejection is going to be till the end, till the last. It's going to last, this anger. It's going to last forever until you. And what is the consequences of anger? The anger of God is damnation, because you reject God. When you reject God, you reject the Son. Remember the parable of Jesus, the owner of the vineyard sending, which is the prophet, sending these people to collect what is due, and they kill the people the owner sends, and then say, oh, when he's going to send his son. Okay, let's kill the son, and that's it. It's going to be ours now. And he says, well, what's going to happen when they kill the son? Well, the vineyard is going to be taken from them, and the anger of God is going to, which happened, of course, as soon as the destruction. First of all, there were the problems they had with the Romans for so long, and then of course ended up with a rebellion and a destruction. All right, so he says, if this is true and it sounds like, and if it's correct, blah blah blah. Okay, let's finish up. It's kind of getting to the end, and I'm kind of getting tired. Tatian's Diatesaron revises the narrative. Tatian's Diatesaron. This is anyways, actually he tells that this is the Tatian did kind of he took the four Gospels. It's an early Christian writer. He harmonized the Gospels into one narrative, and I think so. This is one of the earliest, I think, in the year 190 or something like that. And I think Saint Augustine has the harmony of the Gospels too. But anyways, so the shift towards seeing Jews as directly responsible for crucifying Jesus, well, it wasn't out of the desire of Pontius Pilate. He couldn't care less about this Jewish preacher guy. Appears in the work of Tatian. Tatian, I don't know how to pronounce it. Tatian, an important Christian theologian of the 2nd century, around 190, who lived outside the Roman Empire. He composed the Diatesaron, which you can find it online for free, meaning 1 out of 4. Oh, apparently this early century Christian believed that there were only 4 Gospels, as St. Irenaeus did. Only 4 Gospels. And they were known to be 4. And he quotes them, the 4. So it was not the interpolation and theological understanding of early Christians to make up stories like Cantalamessa and others like him say. So otherwise he could not have composed the one unifying kind of a gospel in a sense. All right, so 1 out of 4. Which harmonized the text of the 4 canonical Gospels. It is not certain whether Tatian wrote the Diatesaron in Greek or Syriac, a dialect of Eastern Aramaic, but the latter version, the Syriac, became the dominant tradition in Syriac churches through the middle of the 5th century. So, in recounting when Pilate condemns Jesus to death following the Jewish crowd's demand that he set free Barabbas and crucify Jesus, the Diatesaron combines John 19:16, Luke 23:25, Mark and whatever, significantly adds the word Jews to the mixture based on the to them. Well, yeah, because Pilate released to them, not to the Romans. He couldn't care lots about the Romans. He released it to the Jews because it is, in a sense, to them, to give them the desire of their hearts in John 19. So he just put the word Jews instead of to them, but he was combining, which may be taken as referring to Jews. Yeah, well, it is, to them. It is not to the Roman soldiers because he released it to the Jews in a sense, but through the Roman soldiers. As St. Peter says, you crucified him, you killed him through the hands of those outside the law. So he quotes the Diatesaron 51:6, and he, Pilate, delivered Jesus up for the sake of crucifixion according to their desire. Yeah, I mean, what's the question here? And the Jews took Jesus, so meaning them, and they went out in order to crucify him because he gave it to them. And I didn't actually go through the whole, وسلم, in Arabic it says وسلم يسوع إلى الصلب على حسب مأثورهم واليهود أخذوا يسوع ومضوا ليصلبوه. So the Jews took him to be crucified. Yeah, so basically because they were following Jesus, so he gave it to the Jews, and in a sense because through the hands of the Roman soldiers. John is noted is ambiguous since it includes a scene later in the same Gospel of John, the to them which he is so obsessed with, where soldiers are depicted as having crucified Jesus. Yes, because that's what happened. The author of the Thesaron probably believed that John 19 refers, let's read minds now, as Scott Adams would say, well, I'm going to read, are we reading minds here? That John 19 refers to the same event as Mark 15. Therefore, soldiers took over Jesus from Pilate and were identified as, therefore the soldiers took over. So he's combining Mark 15. Is this where the priests of the soldiers of the high priest mocked Jesus? Therefore, the soldiers who took Jesus from Pilate were identified as Jewish soldiers of the high priest. Well, did the Jewish soldiers of the high priest crucify the two thieves on the left and right of Jesus Christ too? No. So he's like, it probably means, and he's assuming it's the same event, the mocking of Jesus by the soldiers and the mocking of Jesus by Herod and the mocking of Jesus by the soldiers and of the high priests when he was being questioned are all the one and the same event. And they are not the one and the same event. They are three separate events. Monsieur Professor. Therefore, they must have been Jewish soldiers of the high priest, and the rest of the narrative reads on the assumption that officers means Jewish officers everywhere. On whose assumption? On your assumption? The claim that the Jewish crowd mocked Jesus was partly the result. The claim that the Jewish crowd mocked Jesus was partly on the result of the translation. Mark has Pilate. Mark has Pilate handing Jesus over to a cohort. That is a Roman military unit. Syriac, however, had no such technical term and rendered cohort as crowd, thus removing Roman cohort from the picture and leaving Jesus in the hands of the Jewish crowd. Well, I'm pretty sure the Jewish crowd was surrounding the Roman cohort because they're taking one prisoner. Can you imagine the crowd surrounding him? Crucify him. So it's like, all right, we're taking him. But it is, it's a scene, you can see it in your head. It wasn't like so orderly. Okay, the Roman soldiers are taking them and everybody's standing there, very quiet and watching. No, it was like it's a crowd. It's a mob. Moreover, once Christianity spread outside the Roman Empire, new communities emerged who were less familiar with the Roman jurisprudence and governance. The same is true of later authors writing after the Roman Empire. These Christians would not have known that the crucifixion was. These Christians would not have known that that crucifixion was a Roman, not a Jewish method of execution. My question to you, Professor, is how? In the New Testament itself, it says, the high priest says, we are not allowed to kill him. We can't kill him. You, Pilate, have to do the ordering. You have to do the crucifixion. We are not authorized to do it. We cannot do it. We can only stone him if we want to, but even that we are not allowed to do. So no, buddy, early Christians had the New Testament in itself, and they knew exactly what was allowed and what was not allowed. They would not have been unfamiliar with the prerogatives and duties of the Roman governors in the province, and would have not understood the Latin terminology, military terminology, including centurion, cohort, and praetorium. Well, what do you call the whole of Western Europe? They were all Latins. Even the Orthodox call us the Latins because they spoke Latin. and the liturgy of the Roman Church was changed from Greek into Latin. And these all Latins did not understand Latin? Okay. Thank you for your wisdom here, Professor. Revising Mark, the Syriac and Arabic translations. I'm just going to kind of skip a bit here. So he's harping again. Now Pilate, again, the to them. He reads to them. And Bar Abba, he delivered to them. Okay, that he might be crucified. Okay. The second to them is absent from the Greek original. Where is he's talking? Mark. And I think in Mark, actually, was it Mark or Matthew who originally wrote his language in either Hebrew or Aramaic, actually. Eusebius, St. Irenaeus says that. The second to them is absent from the Greek original. In this context, it can refer only to the Jewish crowd. And how many people read Aramaic, sir? It was a minority. And obviously, these people lived with the Romans way before, so they know exactly how Romans governed. Just as the first term to them. Okay, and he's harping on the to them, and we dealt with that stupid thing already. So I'm not going to waste my time on it anymore. Cohort, praetorium, blah, blah, blah. Okay. The Syriac reader of Mark 15:16 will likely conclude that Pilate delivered Jesus to the Jews, which he did, but because he delivered to the Jews, meaning he gave in to them, he delivered him to the Jews, he delivered Jesus to their will, which was to have him crucified. And therefore the officers, and therefore that is your conclusion, your false conclusion, the officers who took Jesus over were not Roman, but Jewish soldiers. Find me one Aramaic scholar, find me one of the Chaldean church, or the Church of the East, the Syriac Church of the East, or anybody who claims it was Jewish soldiers who took Jesus to be crucified. You're creating a fiction and trying to destroy the fiction. After all, perhaps it was the guards of the temple, or the soldiers of Herod. So the soldiers of Herod would violate the sovereign rule of, they are interfering, that soldiers from another kingdom, which is Galilee, doing an execution in another kingdom. Oh yeah, I think Pilate would be truly happy with that. Perhaps it was the soldiers' guards from the temple, or the soldiers of Herod's Antipas mentioned by Luke. Perhaps you're just plain wrong. So he talks about Arabic translations, again, to him, ilayhum, to them, but again, yes, you have to understand how language is spoken, sir. The text adds details that doesn't appear in the Greek text of Mark, so it talks about the Aramaic, Syriac, that Pilate handed Jesus over to them, the Jewish crowd. Following, yes, he did, because he gave into their will. Following the Gospel of John and the Syriac version, the guards took him to the court of judgment and called together all the assembly. Here too, we have authorities, but instead of soldiers who are necessarily Roman, we have guards, which in context probably means Jewish guards, those who serve the chief priests. And like that, has been suggested, so it probably means, and it has been suggested regarding the Syriac Desaron, instead of Roman soldiers, we have general term of assembly, ostensibly synonymous with the Jewish crowd mentioned. Notice how many wiggle words he uses. Well, it probably means, it has been suggested, it is ostensibly synonymous, as if soldiers cannot be guards. Roman soldiers can be guards? Soldiers are just Romans, and guards must be Jewish? What? Do soldiers never guard anything? Are they just involved in war? When you're an occupying force, they're not fighting anybody. They're pretty much guards. They're the police. They're the guards. The Roman soldiers are guards too. I know it's a very hard concept to understand for, intelligent professors like him. Finally, we're almost done. These events all take place not in the praetorium of the governor, but in a court of judgment. A more general term, which could include the praetorium of the governor in this context, to imply, it implies a Jewish tribunal. So it probably means it has been suggested, ostensibly synonymous, it implies. Okay, yeah, that's very scientific and very rigorous, as I see. Thus, after all these wiggle terms, thus, in these manuscripts, the headquarters of the Roman governor was changed into the house of the Jewish high priest. Says who? Did you find any statement to that effect? No. You're using implies, suggested, maybe synonymous. Yeah, that's very, very hard hitting there, sir. All right, let's close up. Influence on the Jewish retelling in Babylonia. So he basically here says, so the whole point of this is that, the sages of the Jews, the sages of the Talmud, who gave us modern so-called Judaism, because real Judaism, according to Moses, cannot be practiced. You cannot do anything God commanded. No priesthood, no temple, no sacrifice, no covenant, no nothing. So, but anyways, the sages, who if you defy, if you contradict, you're worse than a heretic. You cannot be saved if you defy the sages who gave us, because all of Judaism, modern Judaism, is based on the Talmud. The Talmud of the Babylonian Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, the Tosefta, and of course the Mishnah. So the Talmuds, the Mishnah, and the Tosefta are the basis of the created religion of Rabbinic Judaism, because it has no basis in Scripture. The rabbis were not the rulers of the Jews. It was the priests, the high priests, the sons of Aaron, the high priest, and then the priest and the Levites who were in the temple. They are the rulers of the Jews, not the rabbis. But of course, the rabbis allotted to themselves the honor of the priesthood. Now, if you defy the rabbi, you're defying God. You're defying the sages. You insult the sages. The sages are the Oral Torah. The Oral Torah is far more important than the written Torah of Moses. This is listen to Rabbi Mizrahi and others. This is basically the religion based on the Talmud. So to insult the Talmud by saying that from the Torah.com, to say that the compilers of the Talmud were deceived by Christians, then I'll leave you to your Jewish co-religionists here. Returning to the Talmud, the Hebrew text of the Baraita Sanhedrin was likely based, again he uses these wiggle words, based on a Syriac source text. Likely based on a Syrian source text, like Q. Well, where is this text stating that Jesus was crucified by the Jews? The Syriac source was, as Peter Schaeffer, which is the author of many books, by which I've reviewed, I think, a couple. Here, Jesus in the Talmud. Which as Peter Schaeffer argues probably the Tesaron. Apparently, the Sassanian rabbis adopted the generally accepted narrative about Jesus' death. They accepted the general narrative because it is the truth. And they are the custodians of the Oral Torah, the tradition of the fathers. They have memorized what happened. And they are the inheritors of became the rulers of the Jews. So yeah, they were, because they did not just suddenly say, oh, after 500 years, maybe these Christians this actually happened to this Jesus, to this Nazarene, to this idolater, who actually in the Talmud they say that the Jesus the Nazarene is currently at this very moment boiling in human feces in hell. This is what the rabbis in the Talmud are saying, or have said. It is in the Talmud. So, returning to the Talmud, the Hebrew text of the Baraita was likely based on the Syriac source text, stating that Jesus was crucified by the Jews. The Syriac was probably, as Peter Schaeffer argues, probably the Tesaron. Apparently, the Sassanian rabbis adopted the generally accepted narratives about Jesus' death, and instead of denying it, which, of course, modern so-called Jews, oh, no, we didn't have nothing to do with it. We never crucified this Jesus. It was the Romans who did it. Just magically, the Romans did it. But the rabbis, the old real rabbis, the writers and compilers of the Talmud, no, did not agree with your denial of the at least partial responsibility of, first of all, the high priest and the priest, and of the Judeans at the time of Jesus for the Jesus crucifixion. That is, again, to repeat, this was the plan of God, and this is Jesus. This was why he came. He came to witness to the truth and to be the perfect sacrifice, the perfect lamb, the perfect high priest, to establish the eternal priesthood of Melchizedek, and the new temple, the new sacrifice, and the eternal sacrifice according to Malachi. So it was not, while we're talking about who's responsible, and in the end of the story is God himself, Jesus himself, could have stopped it at any time he wanted to, but he didn't, because that was the divine plan. But anyways, let's finish up here. Apparently the Sassanian rabbis who gave us the Babylonian Talmud didn't know anything, apparently, according to this author, adopted the generally accepted, which means true, narrative that Jesus' death, and instead of denying it, adjusted it so that it fit with, so they adjusted it instead of just going through the crucifixion, so that it fit with what they considered to be correct halachic procedure by having him stoned first. So they, of course, added to it. Of course, they have stories of Jesus the magician and Jesus the son of the harlot, meaning Mary, and Jesus' Roman soldier father. Of course, they cannot accept, even though you read the Aramaic Old Testament, the various Aramaic renderings, you see the word. Actually, you see how the God is Trinity. And you see that the Word was walking with Adam, and it is the Word, which is at the beginning was the Word was God, and the Word was God. And you see the Word, the Son of Man, and the Word, it is all over. So the Christians did not invent these terms. It was the currency, the current language of the people at that time. Okay, so too, the Manichaeans, a Gnostic group in Sassanian Babylonia, who followed the prophet Mani, but revered Jesus as an important figure, followed the Tesaron in claiming that Jews killed Jesus. Well, again, that's okay. I mean, it's in the New Testament itself. It was not the Tesaron. And the Tesaron does not say the Jews personally crucified Jesus. It doesn't say that. Pilate handed I think we got cut off for there for a second. So I don't know what was recorded and what was not recorded, but basically it says that the Manichaeans, he tells us that the Manichaeans who ascribed the law and the God of the Old Testament as an evil God, that the rabbis of Babylonia actually adopted the belief of the Manichaeans that the Jews killed Jesus. The Manichaeans who calls the God of the Old Testament demonic. Is this even logical? He says, indeed, the Manichaean acceptance of this version may have influenced the rabbis of the Talmud. In your dreams. So anyways, he says, of course, the Jerusalem Talmud doesn't mention this, but actually the Babylonian Talmud is far more important than the Jerusalem one. The crown of thorns and the Jews. In addition to the crucifixion, later retellings, which he does not really specify, also cast the Jews as the aggressors in the mocking and torture scenes. So St. Ephraim the Syrian has important figure in Syriac church, has hymns on the crucifixion that claims that Jews were responsible for the mocking scene when Jesus was crowned with thorns. I don't know. I cannot double check because I'm not going to go search for it. In a sense, they were responsible in an indirect manner. But I mean, he was mocked by the Jews, if you want to use that term, of the priest and and the high priest. And he was mocked by the Jews, by Herod and his soldiers. Similar in the 6th, 7th century, in a Syriac work known as the Cave of Treasures, which narrates the history of the world from the creation of Adam and Eve to the end of time, to the time of Jesus, states that the Jewish nation had been granted 3 gifts: prophecy, priesthood, and kingdom. But all the 3 of them were taken away on the day Christ's passion due to their involvement in the crucifixion. So it says prophecy because of the cross, like what was taken away, prophecy because of the cross, priesthood because of the rendering of the tunic of Christ, and the royalty because of the crown of thorns. And here we go. And this is actually true because in the book of Exodus, here in the book of Exodus, chapter 19, it says, Moses says, and you shall be to me, God says, you shall be a priestly kingdom. So a kingdom, a priesthood, and a holy nation. Those are the words thou shalt speak to the children of Israel. So he tells them that the children of Israel will be a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. And of course, after the crucifixion, St. Peter says, first epistle of Peter, to chapter 2, it says, now to the followers of the way, the followers of the Mashiach, the followers of the Son of Man, the followers of the prophet predicted by Moses, who commanded his people to follow him and not himself anymore. He says, Peter says, but you are a chosen generation, a kingly priesthood, a holy nation, a purchased people. So there's nothing weird or strange or anything like that in this description that, the Jews, the Israelites were the holy nation. They were the chosen ones. They had the priesthood and the kingdom, but that was transferred to the followers who kept the faith of Moses, who kept the faith of Abraham, who kept the tradition handed down, who followed the prophecies of Daniel, of the Son of Man, and the Mashiach predicted, who followed the Word, as in the Aramaic translations of the Old Testament talk about the Word himself as being distinct from God, in a sense, the Father. Anyways, the prophecy, so this is nothing to do being anti-Semitic or anything. It is basically, Moses told the Israelites were the chosen ones, the kingly priesthood, the royal, the holy nation, but that was transferred to the Christians. So what's the big deal? Although the thorns are attributed to Pilate's men in the Gospels, these texts assume that the Jews had not only crucified Jesus, but mocked him by putting a crown of thorns on him. Where do you get that from? So he says, even though it clearly says that the crown of thorns was attributed in the Gospels to the soldiers of Pilate, yet for some magical reason, no, we can assume that this magical text assumes it was the Jews who did it. It doesn't. I told you this was like fun times for the Roman soldiers. Hey, let's have some fun with these. This guy who thinks he's a king. Let's show him who's boss here. Let's honor the king. Let's give him a crown of thorns. Anyways, so I'm actually getting tired of finishing it up, but we only have, yeah, that's it. Almost done. Almost done. All right, so let's finish up. Let's get some energy happening here. This retelling of the mocking and torture scene also appears in vernacular versions of paraphrases in medieval Europe. Who cares? The Dutch Liège, whatever, replaces the cohort of the Roman soldiers with the people, presumably the Jews present at the time. So in the medieval retelling of the Dutch story, it says instead of putting cohort, they said the people. Well, as I said, Pilate handed over him to his soldiers. So we can actually see that Pilate actually handed Jesus to his soldiers, and those who were with him, and they should crucify him. And when Jesus had been handed over to those soldiers and sergeants, so where is it to the Jewish people themselves? In his source? They took him and led him into the courtroom and gathered all the people around him and stripped him with his clothes. Again, this is part of a medieval story. Gathered all the people around him. And do we actually know for a fact that no curious Jews went around and watched the Roman soldiers mock Jesus? Very open possibility here. Why not? Why not? Okay. We're done. We are done. In other words, the cohort of the Roman soldiers is turned into the crowd of Jews, where it clearly says that it's his soldiers who took him. It is those soldiers and soldiers who actually led Jesus and mocked him. And it only adds that some people were gathered around him to watch what's happening. So there is nowhere it says in this medieval Dutch story that the cohort of Roman soldiers is turned into the crowd of Jews. Again, another lie from the educated professor. Finally, St. Augustine, Roman reading mitigates the accusation. Talks about St. Augustine. So St. Augustine on John. For it was not said, then therefore he delivered to him up to them, that they might crucify him, but to be crucified. So it's not that they might crucify him, but that to be crucified. He's explaining plain as day. That is to be crucified by the judgment and the power of the governor. But the evangelist says that he was delivered up to them for the reason that they were implicated in the crime. Jesus himself says, those who handed me over to you have the greater sin, from which they were trying to be disassociated. Even at that time, they're trying to be dissociated. Oh, yes, Pilate killed him, but we handed him over. We wanted him dead. For Pilate would not have done this unless he would carry out what he saw that they desired. So it explains. It explains John 19:16 that not that they crucify him, but that he is to be crucified. This is the reading. This is the rendering, which does not mean it is the Jewish crowd that is crucifying, but it was to be crucified, which of course even John himself says the Roman soldiers did. So here's his final excuse, he says. The idea that the governor would simply let the mob lynch a suspect must have seemed rather implausible for anyone familiar with Roman law. Okay, again, one more time, Professor. That is the reason the Roman governor did not allow the crowd to lynch a suspect. Even though you see lynching, meaning like stoning people to death happening, like, some of the Pharisees and wanted to stone the adulterous woman, which is called, in a sense, a lynching. They wanted to stone her to death. And Jesus told them, whoever has no sin, let him cast the first stone. So, but they did not want to do this, and they tried to stone Jesus when he said, before Abraham was, I am. They took up stones. They wanted to stone him to death, meaning lynching. So the idea that, again, what do you have, like a total dictatorship with spies everywhere, not allowing Jews to beat up other Jews? Of course not. You're the governor. Hey, the Jews want to beat up each other. As long as they're listening to me and behaving, I don't care if they go kill a few people. That's basically what a ruler would do. And of course, he did not allow the mob to lynch Jesus, because that's why the priests went to Pilate to ask him that he kill him, because they were not allowed to execute Jesus. So where is his reasoning? There is no reason. The reason, again, the idea that the government would simply let the mob lynch a suspect must have seemed rather implausible for anyone familiar with Roman law. But the governor, who is weak and scared, would allow to calm the crowd and avoid commotion, give in to the will of the crowd. So in the state of Judea, from Wikipedia, it says in 6 AD, Archelaus was banished for misrule, and Judea came under Roman rule. Tensions in Judea grew after direct Roman rule was reestablished. So basically from 6 AD, tensions in Judea grew, and they continued to grow. I mean, people were asking Jesus, should we give money to Caesar? Like, should we pay taxes? Well, that's tension. The place was boiling. So the upper classes favored Romans because it guaranteed their privileged position. The rural class, which is the vast majority of the people, did not, and their yearning for independence and revolution grew. So obviously Pilate would give in to their demands to calm the mob. He didn't allow them to lynch him, but they said, okay, fine, crucify him, fine, go ahead. Vivid memories of the Hasmonean kings, fueled by eschatological and messianic expectations, which, as I said, because of Daniel, basically specifying the time of the appearance of the Son of Man, the Messiah, created dangerous delusions about the prospects of rebellion. These are prospects of rebelling. So yes, the Pilate had a big incentive to give in to the crowd. He had a huge incentive to give in to the crowd. So this Augustinian passage is summarized in the standard medieval Latin biblical commentary, the Glossa Ordinaria of John 19:16, and thus it was widely known in the Latin West during the Middle Ages and afterwards. Although Augustine made use of harsh anti-Jewish rhetoric in his works, including a rhetorical claim of deicide, Rhetorical claim of deicide. Is it a rhetorical claim? Now again, as I emphasized, Jesus said, I laid down my life by my will, and I can take it up by my will. And he tells Peter, don't you think I can get a legion of angels to come and defend me? I don't need your little sword. He told Pilate, you have that power because God the Father gave you that power. So all of this was done by his will, by his permissive will. 2, he came to be crucified, to be the perfect offering, of sin offering, the perfect sacrifice, to open the gates of heaven and to take the people, the just who were in hell and Sheol, in the bosom of Abraham, up to the eternal kingdom. And issue, of course, later on, him being the new Adam, at his second coming, will be the beginning of the new earth and the new heavens, and life everlasting for everybody. The new paradise. My brain just froze. So the claim of deicide, the rhetorical claim. Is it rhetorical? We believe Jesus to be the Word incarnate, the Word made flesh, God himself who walked with you can read it in the Targums. The Word walked with Adam in the garden. The Word was regarded as divine. The Son of Man. Even have a review on a book. It's called The Jewish Gospels by a Jewish professor of Talmudic studies. And he talks about the Son of Man actually is not a human designation. The Son of Man is a divine designation. So when you see it in the Old Testament, the Son of Man is a divine, and then you have the Son of Man sitting at the right, in the book of Daniel, sitting on the right side of the Ancient of Days, which happened going up in the clouds of heaven to the Ancient of Days sitting on his right hand. This is the ascension of Jesus Christ. When you see Stephen or somebody saying, I see Jesus, the Son of Man, sitting on the right hand of the power, the power, which he's quoting John. So the Son of Man is a divine being. He is the second person of the Trinity. So when Jesus is God incarnate in our belief, he is the Word made flesh. He is the Word who was at the beginning and is God and was God and became flesh, he was one divine person in two natures, divine and human, united in a divinity, in a one divine person. That divine person was crucified. That God incarnate was crucified. So it is deicide. It is just a simple matter of fact. Jesus is God. God was crucified. Then God was killed. Of course, God in reality cannot be killed, but in his human nature was killed. And this Jesus, God and man, is one person. So that one person was crucified, that one divine person was crucified. So the accusation of deicide is not a mere rhetorical phrase, but an accurate description. So anyways, St. Augustine's hewing of the simple meaning of the Gospels tempered the full claim of Jewish responsibility for the death of Jesus. This may have helped stop the diastesaron tradition from taking hold in the Latin Christianity throughout the Middle Ages. Well, again, the diastesaron tradition doesn't say anything of what you are implying, as I showed you. And that is the professor. And this is the article. Should we just for funsies before we end here? This is Professor Tamás Visi, who wrote this article for the Torah.com. And I had a whole bunch of biblical citations open, but I guess that's good enough. Don't need to go through them because what is said is said. Let's look at somebody's telling me anti-Semitism. Seraphim Rose. Seraphim Rose was a Protestant, became an Eastern Orthodox monk. What do you mean by anti-Semitic? There is no anti-Semitism here. Arabs are Semites. Real Middle Eastern Jews are Semites. The so-called Jews, if you're talking about in a racial manner, not all talking about beliefs here, racial manner, the European Jews are not really Jews. They're not they are not Semites. They are converts. They're European, Eastern European, or Russian, or Turkic. So the real Jews, like if you went to Egypt like in the 1920s, Jews, Arabs, they all look the same. They all look the same. They're not blonde with blue eyes. And they're calling themselves Jews. All right. So, and by the way, Seraphim Rose, of course, you have the one little prayer in the traditional Roman rite on Good Friday for the Jews, that we're asking God to remove the veil from their eyes, which I think St. Paul talks about, so they will see the truth and be saved. Oh, this is anti-Semitic. Oh, we cannot. Did you, Seraphim Rose? I assume you're Orthodox. Otherwise, why would you take that name? Read or pray the Good Friday prayers in the Byzantine Rite. And if you're talking about, again, I'm not calling it anti-Semitism, but they're showing exactly what happened. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's see one last thing before we go. The opponent copies everything the creator does. So the devil is the creator. Moses made snakes, so did devils. People darken the sun most of the time. When they hear a truth, they think they are being judged and victimized themselves. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, because the devil says, he can masquerade as an angel of light to deceive people. But again, I had a whole bunch of, as I said, a lot of biblical citations, but I think we went far too long, and I don't think anything more needs to be said. But yeah, as I said at the beginning, Jesus himself decided. He came on purpose to this world to die. Jesus came to die, to save us from the sin of Adam and open up heaven for us, and to offer us his salvation, offer us the means of salvation, which are the sacraments of his church, especially baptism and penance or confession, and to help us on that road, which he said, only if you eat and drink, if you eat the bread of the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, if you don't do that, if you don't eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life within you. So he gave us all these means of salvation in his own church, which is, of course, founded upon Peter, the rock, and the other apostles and disciples. So we can always hope for the final reestablishment of communion among all the successors of the apostles and the unity of the one church surrounding the visible center of unity, which would be the successor of Peter in Rome. Anyways, that's it. That's all. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. So yeah, the Talmud itself says, yes, Jesus, we did want it done, and it was done according to our will. So, of course, modern Jews say, no, we had nothing to do with it. It was just the Romans. No, it was a combo. It was a right-left punch, or actually one pulling the strings of the other. We'll get the Romans to do our will. As St. Peter says, you killed him by the hands of those outside of the law. But again, true love is to want their salvation, to want the salvation not only of Israel, of what they call themselves as Jews, followers of the rabbinic creation after the destruction of the Second Temple, of a Judaism which never existed in history, and of course of Muslims and of heretics and of apostates and of pagans. We all want them to share in eternal life in heaven and in the resurrection of the just at the end of time, and the new heavens and the new earth. Anyways, that's it. That's all. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you like it, thumbs up. If you don't, what can I say? And do subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time.